Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and days like today, well really every day, but especially today, are days why I love working in the video game industry and having conversations with all of you, because you just never know what's gonna slide across the news desk where you go, oh, so this is what's being said today. Okay, let's talk about it. So Elden Ring is taking the world by storm. It just reached a brand new peak player count on Steam, even though it's been out for a little bit of time, which is crazy. This game is taking over pretty much every social circle I've ever been a part of, where people who are total 2K bros or playing Madden every week are suddenly on Elden Ring. I'm like, oh God, you are in for a rude awakening, my friend, but I love to see it. So this game is reaching far and wide. It's extremely popular. It is reviewed insanely high. And now some devs are stepping in from Ubisoft and PlayStation in particular to offer some thoughts. And in some regards, I think that these devs are probably saying what many are feeling behind the scenes out loud, and they are feeling the wrath of gamers everywhere. But there are some caveats to these takes that I'd like to discuss in earnest, because I don't believe in the dog pile, attack everybody mentality that the internet constantly cosigns and then fights against endlessly. It's a constant loop. But I still wanted to talk about it in this video because it is making the rounds. It is really interesting to see. Typically, it's a journalist or another content creator in my field having a horrible take that everyone's dogpiling them on. But this time, it's a bunch of developers. So let's get into that. If you're new here and you're into video game conversations, I don't know, this is a pretty topicless one, if you will, then consider subscribing. Now let's talk about what's going on with Elden Ring. So a number of developers across the PlayStation family, specifically Guerrilla and Nixxes, the PC port studio for PlayStation, as well as Ubisoft, oh boy, Ubisoft got in the mix on this one, had some thoughts on what's going on with Elden Ring. So there is this tweet thread that's been going around. It's all over the place now, and it starts with Ahmed Salama, who is a user experience director over at Ubisoft, and he starts off by saying, "The fact that Elden Ring scored a 97 Metacritic is proof that reviewers don't give a flaming poop about game user experience. My life is a lie." Then Rebecca Fernandez O'Shea writes, "Nor PC graphics stability and performance, apparently," which she works at Nixxes as the graphics programmer. And then there is Horizon Forbidden Blake, who comes in saying, "Nor quest design, really." And based off his name, you can guess, yes, he is the senior quest designer at Guerrilla Games for Horizon Forbidden West. Furthermore, the user experience designer for Ubisoft, Ahmed Salama, writes, "Elden Ring's user experience is so bad that I can only imagine FromSoft's devs smoking at their chairs and using CRT monitors. Since then, as you've already seen, all these developers have gone on private on Twitter, so they are not really facing the wrath anymore, as many YouTubers, many outlets have covered what's going on here and pretty much held them accountable, which rightfully so." Let's address first and foremost the elephant in the room here, that someone at Ubisoft who works as a director of this user experience program had something to say about the user experience, the UI crammed, the menu loaded experience of a Ubisoft game, had something to say about Elden Ring, a mostly menuless, UI-less, HUD-less, whatever you want to call it, experience. Okay, so first things first, I gotta write the record on one thing. I've watched a number of videos on this topic, which is kind of against what I do. I like to go in as fresh as possible, but I was just curious, what are people saying about this? Like, are they against this? Are they for this? Because I think on the outside, you can maybe validate the criticism coming from developers. But I saw a lot of creators talking about user experience like it was specifically UI, user interface. UI is what you see, right? Like your health bar on screen, your map bar on screen, like that's UI. While the experience is like the general interfacing with the menus and how smooth all that is. So what Ahmed is saying here is like the sifting through menus in Elden Ring is terrible. And I don't know, there's some fair criticism in here. Like we'll get to what Horizon Forbidden Blake, that name is hilarious, had to say about quest design, which I do think is fair criticism here. But I think this is the issue with highly scored games, is when someone comes from them, everyone rallies up like an army and goes after someone who says something kind of against the grain. And just like I said with Horizon Forbidden West, when it came out, right? And there was a review that was a 6.5. We had a lot of press consoling console fanboys saying, look, ignore that review. And I'm not saying it was a good review. From what I read, I don't think it was great, but the idea that we need to ostracize any thoughts that are against the mold is dangerous, and I don't think we should be encouraging it. And in fact, I find it more interesting to hear, instead of some random YouTuber like myself who does have general game development experience, yes, but random YouTuber versus, hey, a game developer who has a take on this. I wish they got more into it rather than slamming people like myself. I saw a lot of reviewers getting pretty bent out of shape about what they said here because they're like, it seems like reviewers don't care. To me, I'm just like, I don't give a shit what you have to say. I do care about these things because they were called out in my review. But this is why I am a critic and you work in the game development field, because we specialize in two totally different fields, right? Like for me, I can understand the idea that a game can run at less than 60 FPS on PC, but that there's so many achievements in the design of Elden Ring that I could be like, look, the scales have balanced out a little bit. So to me, I don't care if they're going to try to invalidate mine and others' reviews out there. They speak for themselves. And even if you want to cut the reviewers out of the process, the audience speaks for themselves more than anybody. They vote with their wallet and they vote with the player count, which we've seen both are doing quite well. So it doesn't matter what you think, as The Rock would say. Since then, there has been some memes posted, and this one here over on Reddit I thought was so good. It says, if Ubisoft developed Elden Ring, and there's so much about this that is accurate. The enemy detected, the quest logs, the constant updates on your location, the bars everywhere, where there's really like a 4x4 space in the middle of your screen where it's just clarity, right? And then everything else is updates. And when you look at like recently, Far Cry 6, you can see the bottom left, trespassing. You can see the map. You can see all the HUD on the bottom right corner. You can see on the top left a quest log. You can see waypoints all over, icons above the enemy's head. The game doesn't trust the player to learn. And let me give a little bit of an education here to the game devs on why so many players love that Elden Ring goes against the grain. I know a lot of these developers go to school to create games for a AAA audience that are primarily designed for everybody, right? They're made for everybody. So you do what Ubisoft's doing here. Here's how you indicate their quest is updating. Here's what you tell them on the map. You want to keep the player constantly alerted because we're trying to bring in, let's just use the term, casuals, right? Someone who's not familiar with games, where them hopping into something like Elden Ring goes against the grain of what AAA design is, because it respects the player's ability. Here's the thing, game devs and also critics, to learn. The player gets to learn something instead of having it spoon-fed to them with tutorials and menus and constant walkthroughs. They respect your ability to figure things out and treat you like you're not a dumbass, which general AAA design does not do. Don't get me wrong, there are AAA games that don't hold your hand and are still beginner friendly. That does generally exist, but there's no game quite like Elden Ring that is built on such a huge budget on a AAA level that literally takes you off the leash and then kicks you out the door and says, have fun. Okay, see you later. We're not giving you a single tutorial for the next 90 hours. And in what was, in my experience, a 103-hour experience by the time I had rolled the credits, that is incredible. That is why so many people appreciate this game, because it gives hope to modern game design that we're not going to succumb to, in the case of Ubisoft, games loaded up with microtransactions and UI cramming the screen, where Elden Ring, you can just take in the world. That said, though, there is a bit of an unfair criticism for Ubisoft. You can go into the HUD on a lot of their games and you can tweak and turn it off. That's something that a lot of people are ignoring. So I get the Ubisoft slander here. I totally understand why it's a thing, because they still generally cram their games with a lot of info in the corners. Number one, that's what they're taught to do. But number two, you can turn it off if you really want to, and if it bothers you that much to make a meme about it. But still, the irony does not go over my head, but it clearly has for some out there. Now, on the Horizon side of things, I think there's a bit of salt here. I want to make sure people know that I'm not going to take these developers' thoughts and make it represent the entire entity. And if you're doing that, then well, that's just damn silly, right? Because that's just the wrong mindset to have for anything ever in life, is this one figure represents a group of 200 people. What? Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, when I look at Horizon, I wouldn't blame Guerrilla Games at all if there was like a notable amount of saltiness. They launched Horizon Zero Dawn next to a generation-defining title in Breath of the Wild. And granted, like, I'll say it out loud, I enjoyed Horizon Zero Dawn much more than Breath of the Wild, but you could not deny that Breath of the Wild was some generation-defining experience. And then 5 years later, they've been in the trenches working on Horizon Forbidden West. Ooh, here we go. It's finally out. They get like a week of good PR, and then boom, Elden Ring, another genre-defining open-world title. Really setting the standard for what next-gen gaming is. And what's hilarious is this game's available on old-gen consoles. And in fact, like the PS4 version runs better than the PS5 version. Go figure. But I could understand if Guerrilla Games was actually a bit salty because they're kind of being worked over twice. That said, my sympathy is a little bit low on that behalf because they're still making a lot of money. Their game is still going to sell extremely well. It's still a PlayStation exclusive, which brings in a lot of an audience as well. Like, this game's gonna do just fine, but there is the idea of what would have been, right? What if we didn't launch near another generation defining title? Do we know how truly powerful Horizon is if we don't escape the shadow of a game and just have our moment? Granted, again, Horizon had some time, so there were a lot of people who were ready to make their pre-order, but that's why they got the reviews out pretty early ahead of time. And at some point, I'll finally play this game because I've been slacking on it for Retro Rebound and other reviews here on MrMattyPlays. I've been playing my share of bad games that have definitely chipped into my time, like Babylon's Fall, Crossfire X. So I do apologize for the delay on that. I know a lot of people really want to see it. And honestly, I'm just curious myself to prove a point that like reviews generally don't do well if you release them way after the embargo timing. So it's a little experiment for myself that will also tank my channel in the process, but that's fine. It's what you're here for, right? Thank you. So yeah, this was just a really interesting scenario here. Again, where, as I said at the beginning, normally it's like a content creator or something like a journalist having a relatively bad take. It's like, ah, yes, funny. But in the case of devs, I don't think any of these are necessarily awful takes. I think some of them are fair criticism. Like I mentioned, the quest design, I think Elden Ring could have benefited from some type of in-game journal that didn't tell you where to go, but said that Millennia is waiting for me in the Northwest. The Northwest, if you've played Elden Ring, like every corner, this map is huge, right? So giving me like the Northwest, I'm like, okay, that's at least a area to go to. Now I just gotta find out where. Because when you look at, without spoiling anything, certain figurehead characters in this game, they're tucked away in side content behind the hardest areas in the game, in this little corner of the world. There's this huge boss fight that's like buried beneath the final map. Like this game is absurd. It goes against, again, everything that is AAA in design, which is why it's rattling both fans, critics, and developers alike. And what this means, sadly, is we're gonna get a lot of shoddy attempts at reimagining what Elden Ring is, when I think really, I don't want to be too close-minded here, but I can only envision FromSoft doing it because they are the visionaries for what this is, and they've done it for so long. Like for Ubisoft to suddenly come out with their next game in like 2025 and go, we're not holding your hand at all. It's like, well, you've just spent like 2 generations holding my hand. Why are we suddenly trusting you to let me off the leash and design a game just right? Like FromSoft's done this from the beginning, so we'll see a lot of companies shoot for the stars, but I don't know if they'll quite reach. On the note of other fair criticism, I also want to note the PC performance. Like, I did mention how, yes, while it is bad, it didn't invalidate all that was good for the game, but that's another fair piece of criticism. It was terrible, but pretty much everything that was noted here was absolutely accounted for in most people's reviews. The user experience, though, I didn't see many talking about, and in fact, I don't know if most of the industry really knows what user experience is, because most are talking about it like it's just, I'm saying just alone, UI. So it was really interesting to see all this discourse, but I had a lot of fun with this conversation. It's always nice to see some spilt tea and go, ooh, what's going on here? Let's get into this. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think about everything that's going on? Let me know in the comments down below. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.